I'm in the right place at the right time. I am just where I'm supposed to be. Oh, my soul is welcome here. Oh, my soul is welcome here.
Well, good morning to everyone. And I know I alluded to this earlier about my talk last week. My talk last week really talked about doing this floating thing. And I talked about my travels and things that were happening there. But what's interesting is that we're all traveling. We're all traveling every day through our day and through what's going on. And spiritual practice is applied to us moment by moment. And in those moments, we can remember that we are practicing our spiritual practice, that this is a process. And so I loved that idea that it doesn't have to just come in a blissful moment of snorkeling off the island of Maui. That it can come at my desk in Toledo, Ohio while I'm paying bills. That both are spiritual experiences. That even in an argument, and maybe it's the same argument you've had with this person, or maybe it's even the argument you've had with yourself, that even in that moment, you are in spiritual practice. And you have a choice in what you practice. And when I started thinking about this power of understanding, something playful started happening this week. And I know one of the things I said last week is one of my new phrases, and I've said it a few times today, as a reminder, maybe not even to you, maybe to myself, to be playful in the kingdom of God. That the kingdom of God is present within you right here, right now, and you're allowed to be playful. Playful. I love the idea of a lot of gray hair people skipping around. I'm not going to lie. That is a visual that I am going to remember throughout the week when I think about what's going on. I'm going to think, yes, we can still be playful, and how important that is. And I know that I wanted to follow up this week with, this is the last week of the month, and we'll be moving into a new power of will next week. And we've got some exciting things planned. But I wanted to talk about something that kept coming up for me in this playground, and that is perspective. Perspective and the role that it plays in accessing this power of understanding. I wanted to really think about, and I have been, and it's been showing up in really fun and playful ways this whole week. Right down to yesterday in the car, Kathy Oakley drove with me, and she's like, "Is this going to be in your talk tomorrow?" I go, "It's all hands on deck. It's all hands on deck." You could be. But I know it just being fun in the kingdom of God is getting to be playful with the universe. And having this idea of perspective just come up and allow it to shape where we're going. And so I kept having these experiences, and I really wanted to understand too a little bit. I went back to like a foundational definition of perspective. And perspective can be a point of view. And it can also be the capacity to view things in their true relation or relative importance. Like, do you have a perspective of what's going on right now? Of course you do. In fact, not only do you have a perspective of what's happening, but each and every one of you has a different perspective right now just looking this way. Like, Larry in the back corner is seeing me mostly from this side, while Kathy in this corner is seeing me mostly from this side. And it reminded me of this conversation I had with a good friend of mine who's an amazing artist. And his form of art is actually replicating. So he can look at something and he can replicate it. And it's an amazing skill. I've always been in awe of it. And so we got into this conversation, and I said, "How is it that you do that?" And he said, "Well, one of the things I have to do is get very present to just the lines." He's like, "I have to release my brain's tendency to fill in the picture, and I have to just look at the lines." Any artists out there are shaking their heads. Drawing artists, I guess, or sculpting artists, or whatever. when you just look at the lines, he said, then you can just start kind of tracing it on your paper. You can see those lines kind of transferred. And I'd never thought about it that way. Because when I draw a picture, I'm looking at the 3D, I'm trying to capture all of that, and I'm missing the lines trying to get the bigger picture. And I thought how appropriate, how applicable that is to my life. How many times have I been trying this whole vision thing and missing the present right in front of me? And I really loved that idea of perspective. The artist's perspective is a little bit different than what I choose as my perspective. And what it reminded me right there as well is that we have a choice. Sometimes when we look out, we see things and we forget we have a choice is how we see it. How we see it is perspective. And then I started digging a little deeper under that because I know we've talked about presence. I know we talk about that here. And I started seeing these things on, I know many of you don't TikTok, but I do. And maybe you see it on Facebook or some other social media. But there's this short little 1-minute film, and it's got this horse, and this horse is walking. And it says, depending on if you were in your right brain, you see the horse walking forward. If you're in your left brain, you see the horse walking backward. It's the same physical video. And what's really mind-blowing, and I love this, is that we have the capacity to drift from right brain and left brain. So you have the capacity to see the horse walking forward and walking backward. And sometimes it flips for me, and I'm like, oh, ooh, interesting. I thought it was an interesting perspective. I also loved this one that comes up, and it says whatever word you're reading is what you'll hear. Anybody see that one? So you read the word, it's this kind of crumpled up is how I could say it, but they say these words, and one is, doesn't make sense to me. It's green needle. And then the other word is brainstorm. Now, my logical mind saying that to you, those don't sound anything alike. But if you do this, and you can Google it, I'm sure it's on YouTube or something if you really want to see it. But you read the word, and whatever word you're reading, that's what you hear. And it's an amazing reminder, perception can shift. And it can shift very easily. And it's a great reminder that you have this opportunity to connect with and choose your perspective. And why that's important, in my mind, as I was playing with it this week, is that having an understanding, a deeper understanding of my own perspective has this effect of freeing me from being so jailed or caged by it. Meaning, you can think outside the box. Sure. You can sometimes in that process feel untethered when you're really looking and drilling down on your perspective and where does it come from and asking good questions. But what really happened for me was this freeing moment of going, because I'm willing to understand that my perspective is not the only perspective, even at any given time, it opens me up to relate to others better and understand and honor that they may have a different perspective. Right now, normally, I wouldn't even think what it looks like through the eyes of the camera looking at me. I wouldn't think about it because my perspective is top of mind. My view of this room is this way, that way. And yet, acknowledging that you are looking in this direction actually helps me spiritually in a sense of understanding others, understanding myself better. Have I confused anyone yet? Are you following any of this? If you are, poke your neighbor and tell them what I'm saying. Okay, they've got it. Good. Excellent. We're on a good train here, people. I just thought the perspective piece was so interesting because not only are we talking about a line of sight perspective, but when you start talking about your deeper spiritual perspective or the way your mind thinks or what's going on, you're telling a story. And sometimes we forget the underlying story. And here's an example of how it showed up for me this week. I happened to have a meeting at Seagate Center, which now is called the Glass City something center. I don't know, but Seagate Center. And they're doing a huge construction. It all looks so different. It's wonderful. And so I go to the second floor where the offices are, and I had a meeting with them. And so I'm in my like businessy attire kind of thing, trying to be all professional. And I had to take a bio break. I had to use the bathroom. So I'm on my way to the bathroom. And the reason this is important is because I had to walk down this huge long hallway because of all the construction. So while I'm doing that, I'm passing all of these construction workers that are on these scaffolding. And scaffolding is not like it is high tech. They are moving accordion like platforms that can go forward and backward and up and down. And so I'm just walking and I turn and I'm talking to this guy, kind of having a little happy banter, and I turn around and this hallway overlooks the first floor. And in the time that I was doing this and my sight wasn't here, a guy from the first floor had lifted himself on the scaffolding and he was right there. And I turned around and I was like, oh, it's like, you guys are hanging out everywhere. And his response to me was, well, I'm not hanging out. I'm waiting for the work that needs to go next. And I was like, oh, I feel like a jerk now. I was saying I was startled and you're hanging out everywhere. And he heard it as this underlying story that construction workers hang around a lot. They don't do their work. They're not always working. And it wasn't what I was saying at all. But you can see and hear how the underlying story directed his experience, his perspective. And I a lot of times I then get really self-conscious. I'm like, well, what I really meant was, and I try to explain it away. And I thought, no, I'm just going to keep walking. The truth is, I don't have to explain one thing in the world. And I'm sure that me overusing a lot of words right now with this guy is not going to be like, you're right, Natalie. Let me unlock my subconscious and have a different experience. Honestly, if that would have happened, I probably would have fell off the second floor. But so it just was a great reminder, though, that he's not the only one doing that. Anybody else doing that in their life? I know I definitely do that. And sometimes I'm completely unaware of my story that's happening. And it was just really interesting to me to kind of have that brought back to me and have this moment, simple moment, be top of mind to my awareness because I was being playful with perspective. And this situation came up. And I have these fun things when I was like researching this a little bit and looking for different perspectives. And I actually came across the old Abbott and Costello, Who's on First. And I love that old skit. And I love it because one man understands that the players' last names are who and what. And the other person is simply asking a question, unaware of that that's their name. And then he's like, well, who's on first? Yes. What? No, what's on second? And it's just such a great play of perspective. If you don't have the perspective of understanding that their name is that, then you have this great comedy. Really, it's a great comedy gig. And have you ever seen or done this? I'm sure many of us have done this at some point where you're texting someone and they text you back and they're like, what? And you read it as what? Instead of they're going, what? I don't understand. And they're thinking, hey, I'm having this chill conversation. And you're like, I can't believe they said this to me. Where is this idiot coming from? I know we've done it in traffic. Traffic is my favorite example because you're definitely, I was just yesterday driving the crew up to the lake and this car went speeding down the highway. And I love to come up with scenarios as to why they're speeding like a crazy person. Instead of engaging in what usually happens, which is my fear that, hey, oh, you're driving out of control. You better get yourself under control. I was already safe over here, and this person was flying. And, well, I love to come up with funny scenarios with it. And I was like, so mostly I say they have to go to the bathroom really bad. But because I can relate to that. And yesterday, for some reason, I was like, oh, that guy just robbed a bank. Get on it, sir. Like, it was just funny to change up the perspective to help me unlock maybe fear, or fear that then turns into frustration or anger or things like that. It just kind of unlocked it, and we had a great laugh about it. And so I loved that changing perspective, especially in humor, can really start changing some of that underneath behavior that I was exhibiting. I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for you. But to me, perspective then circles back to being very important to the conversation of our own power of understanding. And so I was listening to this great Dr. Joe Dispenza work. It's called Supernatural, and it talks about becoming supernatural. And it's interesting because it's a perspective that we're talking about right here, which is when you change things. We've said it before. Dr. Wayne Dyer has said it. When you change the things you look at, the things you look at. I'm sorry, what? Oh, thank God you're awake. Okay, good. Yes, they change. And so Joe Dispenza describes it as, thoughts repeated become beliefs. Beliefs repeated become attitudes. And attitudes repeated become our subconscious. They become our subconsciousness. That made a lot of sense to me. I like linear things. It made a lot of sense that that's something I've done. So then I was kind of delving in a little deeper for myself and looking at my own layers of perspective. And I thought how some of these layers that I've just taken on and repeated disempower my ability to access understanding. So I really took a deep dive and looked at myself as honest as I could. And I thought, and we sort of talked about it in the car yesterday with Kathy. I was workshopping this. No, but I was talking about how I grew up in a faith, the faith of my origin, which by sharing this, I do not mean any disrespect to. I have a lot of respect for the faith that brought me to these new understandings. So I honor what I no longer resonate with, because it brought me to a new resonating space. But my example is that I grew up Catholic, and I heard the phrase, I am not worthy to receive you, over and over and over in every Mass that I was at. And because it was a thought, and it repeated, it became a belief. And there's a part of me that embodies that in my subconscious. And I believed God was something outside of me, and that I had to do the right thing to find favor, and then maybe my life would go well. And then I watched holy men justify their leadership because Jesus Christ was a man, and justify women being a second-class leader because they weren't a man. And I had to own what that meant for me and how I received that and how that shifted my perspective. And I want to remind you again that I'm not making this wrong. That's not the goal. The goal was to look at that and to see how I had taken that in to my behavior. And one of the ways that happened was when I finally really felt called to this position. All of my life looked like I was preparing for this. And my dear friend Julie, I'll never forget, she goes, why haven't we thought of this before? And I had to own it and say, because we grew up Catholic and men did this, not women. And it was so freeing in that moment to have a different perspective. And this is the dream job I never knew I wanted. Never. I bet 20 people said, you know, Natalie, I think you are a bit of a minister. And I would be like, shut your mouth. No. Because it was challenging to me, and it challenged subconscious beliefs I held about myself. That actually, if I started getting clear, I never really truly resonated with. So, anyone else have an experience they're relating to? Take a deep breath with me. Yeah, we all have a part of that. All of us share similar stories. And again, it's interesting to then go back and look at what do you resonate with now? Because what resonates with me is that I became a spiritual seeker because that stuff didn't resonate with me. And I knew it on some level. And so that brought me to different books like Dr. Wayne Dyer's work, like Marianne Williamson's work, like Deepak Chopra. Probably got to him through Oprah, to be fair, but resonated with it, and kept finding and following the things that resonated with me. And that's what led me here. And that's what led me to study many religions. And then realize that really what I was looking for was this spiritual principle and not a dogma to follow per se. That I really wanted to understand who the spirit is of Natalie, and then I wanted to understand not just her, I wanted to understand that bigger connection. And I wanted to understand it because I was remembering who we truly are. Right now, you are remembering who you truly are. Who you are. Not just this body that has a name, but who you truly are, which is something so much bigger. It's something that has a consciousness that is for you. That you don't have to please it or worship it or do anything to earn it. It is within you. And it is asking you to just simply breathe and allow it to come forward and to float up within you. That was a different perspective. That was a perspective that I had to practice over and over. I had to repeat the thoughts over and over until they really became a stronghold belief in my life. And then I believed it and kept believing it over and over and repeated that practice. And I immersed myself in this community with like-minded folks, and that attitude, or those beliefs became my attitude. And what I started to realize this week as I was playing in this energy of perspective was that my subconscious has been gently ushering out the energy that no longer serves me, that I no longer resonate with. And it came out in a discussion because the reason I was at Seagate was that I was invited back by my old job to be a volunteer. I used to work for Girl Scouts, and I've told this story before, but for those who haven't heard it, I was in charge of an event called Believe in Girls. And Believe in Girls was this great event that I really had dreams for. And the first year that I was in charge of doing it, I said, wait, why don't we get AstroTurf for the center of Seagate Center, and we'll create a park. I mean, we are the Girl Scouts. We can bring the outdoors inside and do that. And they were like, we do not have the budget for this, Natalie, nor do we appreciate your creative thinking around this. I don't believe we're going to have it happen. And I said, challenge accepted. Happy to do it. And somehow, through my connections, my job was to go out and make connections with people in the community. And so through my connections, I made a connection with Rossford Athletic, which is just a big tent out in Rossford. And they were like, we're getting rid of this AstroTurf. And I was like, can we borrow it? And they were like, if you can move it, it's 2,000 pounds. Noted. All right. Called U-Haul. We do not haul things 2,000 pounds. Not like that. You're going to need something called a Moffett truck that comes with its own forklift. Not a problem. Not a problem. How are we going to manifest this? You put it out there. Somebody I knew someone with a Moffat truck. We paid them in Girl Scout cookies to bring it from Rossford downtown Toledo and then remove it and bring it to where it needs. It happened. And it happened because I had been steeped in this understanding there's something bigger than me moving. And I trusted in that. And so now, when I did that, it irked some of the people that were like, you can't do this. And so I've been away from it now for 3 years, and the big event still happens. And they asked me to come back and volunteer. And what they informed me was that now they write grants so that we can have AstroTurf. I loved it. Human Natalie was like, yes. Oh, I feel so vindicated right now. Ooh, this feels good. And then I was having a conversation about it, and I realized there was something that was happening then a little bit more than happens now. And my dear friend Kathy asked me about it, and she said, so what changed? Great question. What changed? And what I realized had changed is that when I was at Girl Scouts, I knew I was a creative person. I knew I was a manifester, but I wanted them to validate it. I wanted them to validate me. And so in essence, this is validating me a little bit. But also just when the AstroTurf showed up, I was like, and I was really happy. So I thought, but it was a fleeting happy because they weren't like, wow, Natalie, you really did it. They were like, okay, well, how is this going to get replicated next year under the same budget? Well, it won't. But all of that was me looking for validation outside in. And when I really delved into my perspective, that makes a lot of sense because I was still with this subconsciousness of God is outside and I need to get favor. It really made sense because I was still playing in that I'm not worthy, so I'm not telling myself I'm worthy. Therefore, I need you to tell me I'm worthy. I was playing in these old beliefs and attitudes, and what had changed in some respective is that I now had a lot deeper understanding of this connection of God within me. And I understood that my validation comes from within. And I understood how powerful that was. That if I am validated on the inside, I don't have to really be validated from the outside. Not that human Natalie isn't like, oh yeah, that feels good. But human Natalie isn't led around by it, isn't jerked around by it, isn't dependent on outside circumstances to make it happen, and isn't looking and begging for it, passive-aggressively, from others. I had to own my own behavior with that, but this perspective was a shift that went through the stages of repeated thoughts, to repeated beliefs, to repeated attitudes that shifted my subconsciousness that then actually shifted my behavior. That was powerful. And I know that I'm sharing my part of that story, but that is our story. There is things happening in your life right now that's what's going on. And part of me sharing this today was that we talk about what's real and just authentic and what's going on. And that there's moments where, we go back to frustration or we go have these moments of misunderstanding, but that the spiritual practice has a value of freeing you. There is a great freedom there. And when I look at my life, there's a lot of things happening that are chaotic. There's chaos. It's not that I'm blind to it. I just have a different perspective. That perspective is that the person of Natalie actually isn't being called to go to Ukraine and physically move this from here to there. That's not where I'm being called. What I'm actually called to understand is that The human of me has this greater awareness, and this awareness is in the oneness, and that oneness is that we are all connected. And so when I take the responsibility to look at my perspective and empower my understanding, there is a shift within my subconsciousness. And it's not even about me. When I shift that subconsciousness to understanding the oneness, I am contributing to the shift of the entire oneness. I am contributing deeply to the shift of how I interact with people, which actually echoes out from each and every one of us. Your choices, your spiritual practice matter because it is shifting, uplifting, and freeing all of us. That's an important perspective. We're doing a lot of shifting and changing as a community, and so we're looking at promotion and we're redoing our website. And when you do those things, they ask you who you are. So we got to be clear about who we are. We got to be clear about who we are because there are people hungry for this message. There are people that absolutely are resonating with us. And we just want to invite them to continue resonating. Whether they're in this room or out there, this community is a community that has the audacity to say, we love. That's what we're about. And loving at that capacity does require an understanding. And does require us to engage our power of understanding in a place from deep within. Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about how most of our actions are really dictated from the subconscious level, which is why when I see chocolate, I must have it. But even beyond the joke of that, it's really just our subconscious is running a lot of things. And sometimes our brain just can't say, now subconscious, Natalie, I would like for you to now be perfect. It's a practice of a spiritual practice of understanding and being willing to understand yourself and being willing to look from a different perspective. And that's why perspective is important to the power of understanding. And that's how I know that this shift is real and it's not just about me. This morning I asked us to go into this meditation about zooming out. And it's kind of a computer thing. Like 20 years ago, you'd be like, what? Zoom out. But zooming out is taking the picture and pulling yourself out of just who you are and looking at it bigger. And it's also important to zoom in and understand that your perspective is echoing out all the time. All the time. You know, I was recently rereading one of my favorite books. It's from this, it's called Untamed. It's by Glennon Doyle. And she talks about her own observations of her subconscious and her thoughts. And she said, one of the things I realized about myself is that when I had discomfort, or even if I had just emotions that weren't happy and joyful, I thought something's wrong. Something needs to be fixed. Something is wrong here. And she said she was in a 12-step meeting, actually, and she was complaining about how uncomfortable she was in the early days of her sobriety. And a woman came up to her and shared with her that feelings are just meant to be felt. She's like, you mean nothing has to be wrong? I can just have these feelings? Yeah. In fact, one of the root shifts in my own self-conscious or subconsciousness is that I stopped saying what's happening is wrong. What's happening shouldn't be happening. And I started being bold and saying the universe is always working out everything for me. I got bolder and I said, everything's always working out for me. That's a hard thing to say to yourself when you lose your brother. And then I had the audacity, because I was so in this steeped place, to say everything's not only happening in my favor, but it's actually happening for me. So when you lose someone really important in your life, that is hard to say. But what I know is true is there is freedom in there. There is a deeper understanding. There is still a connection there that I am asking for. And the mind of Natalie may never understand. In fact, when you lose someone, sometimes it's really hard to hear someone say, I'm sure this is for a better reason. I have to have compassion in that moment, because the human of me is really not seeing it. But a shift in perception and practicing it one time, you can start practicing it over and over. And practicing it over and over, I realized that the way I'm experiencing grief right now is it comes in like a rainstorm, but it doesn't have to storm all the time. I can simply allow it to float by. And that not being in this deep grief actually doesn't disrespect the loss I have. It respects the connection I still have with this person I feel I've lost. And in doing that, it keeps me connected in such a way that it's not that I don't grieve, it's not that I don't hurt from it, but it's I understand it differently, that I'm still connected. And that becomes really important for me to hold on to when I'm feeling the loss, when I'm feeling all that heavy stuff. And I share that with you because I know you don't come in here light as a feather. Some of you come in here and heavy stuff's been happening in your life. And it's not wrong that that's happening. It's not even that you have to fix everything. It's an invitation that something is happening for you to engage in this higher sense of yourself that is calling you. It is calling you forward. It is calling you to this freedom. It is calling you to swim, float, kick, splash, be playful in this energy of love. And one of the results of that is that for me, something kept rising up. When I no longer needed outside validation and I came in for the validation, there's something that happened that's, I just keep calling it spiritual authority. There was a sense of trusting the God within me. And that gave me this spiritual authority that helped not have power over anything, but to trust that the power is within me, that these powers are there for us, and that at no time have I ever been alone in the process, and that trusting myself to follow what resonates. It doesn't make me a man-made God. It makes me a person lovingly connected to God from the inside. Do you understand that? Does that connect for you? All right, take a breath. And poke the person next to you. Except Julie, she doesn't like getting poked. Oh, that's a lie. She likes getting poked. I say these things because this is what's happening in so many of us. And I feel like I want to be someone who has the audacity to say it, even if it's not pretty or even if it's not perfectly wrapped up in a bow. I want to be in this spiritual practice together. I want to walk in this world hand in hand and stop having to feel as though I'm doing this by myself. And I want to be in a community where I can say, I know you see me. Here's what I'm chewing on. I know you see me. Thank you for loving me when I'm in the big ugly cry. Thank you for loving me so I have someone to celebrate joy with. Thank you for telling me stories that will feed my next resonation with God. Thank you for being the Spirit of God and letting me see God in you. That's what we're called to do in this community. That's what we're called to do with one another. And that's your challenge this week. I want you to look at your perspective. I want you to see what's underneath. Often in Unity, we talk about this green growing edge, and I always have this vision of beautiful, bright green moss as this green growing edge of ourselves. And I want you to just kind of, you know how moss grows over a sidewalk and you can kind of lift it up, and there's the sidewalk. This week, I want you to kind of do that with yourself. Lift up the green growing edge and see what's underneath. What is guiding you? What is your perspective? And what do you want to do with that? I guess what I'm asking you to do is to be present to yourself. Not just looking at the whole picture all at once, but get present to yourself. Look for those lines. Become the artist. Remain playful in this kingdom of God. When you see chaos in front of you, don't take it at face value. Ask what's there for you. For you, in your favor, for you. You know, there's this line in this song by Adele, and I gotta pull it up here. It's this song that's called "Easy for Me," and the first line in the song is, "There ain't no gold in this river that I've been washing my hands in forever." And I thought, sing it, Adele. It felt like such a resonating truth that I've been washing my hands in a river that does not resonate gold for me. And I have the opportunity to actually find the gold. And so becoming present to your perspective, coming present to what you think about, how that becomes beliefs, how that becomes your attitude, and how that has become part of your subconscious. That helps in that process of making that shift. And it fully engages all of us in our Christedness. So this week, I encourage you to look at the water you've been washing your hands in and take that 20 seconds, because we all wash our hands for 20 seconds, right? Every day, often. Take that time to be mindful. When you're washing your hands this week, that's your cue. Just take a moment to be mindful. Often when you're washing your hands, there's a mirror in front of you. Look at you. Look at the Christed one within you. And allow it to engage your power of understanding. Take a deep breath with me. And let us pray into the oneness. Eternal loving presence here in heaven, hallowed be our holy name. Our kingdom has come. Divine will is always being done on earth. May we realize heaven. May we know we are of source and our every need and desire is already ours. Source is all there is, and as source, we are abundant givers and receivers. May we live from the oneness and recognize we are always connected to one another and to a higher consciousness. Allow divine thoughts to express through you and deliver us from the broken thoughts of separation. For ours is this kingdom, this power, and this glory, now and forever. And say it with me. And so it is. Amen.
I'm in the right place at the right time. I am just where I'm supposed to be. Oh, my